We had to check this one out. Mythic Plus isn't out yet, but Nakira knows the good questions to ask for Mythic Plus. Then we're looking at tank nerfs, class balance, Arcade Mage just got nerfed, and more. This video is from a couple days ago, so we're a few days late on it, but let's see if we have any super awesome info in here.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Nagura, and I'm here at Gamescom with game producer George Valef and production director Michael Bybee. There we go.
Michael.
Thank you so much for joining me and answering some of my questions, hopefully. We'll see.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here and to maybe answer your questions. Yeah.
We'll see. All right, so my first question, if you can start straight away. My question is about normal and heroic week. Because for a while in Dragonflight, we had released normal and heroic raids at the same time with Mythic. But now we're going back to having the normal and heroic week before Mythic releases a week.
She's asking the good question right here. Why is everything so damn delayed? This was, yeah, exactly. Exactly, this is the question. So basically she's like, why are we going back to a week of delay here? Whereas in the past, we had the content sooner. What's going on? I'm really curious on their answer here.
Week after. And when that was the case the last time, you made sure, or you told us that you wouldn't be doing any major balancing changes without announcing it beforehand. Is that something you plan on doing again? Or is your approach going to be different this summer?
Generally, when we do things like the normal road week into the Mythic week, we do use that information to sort of guide decisions for, classes or specs that are maybe underpowered or overpowered. That being said, when we do these changes, we're very conscious of the fact that some players level, 5, 10, 15 characters. We don't want to try to, massively upset the meta. So when we do, approach these conversations for tuning, our goal really is to do very slight adjustments for things that are overperforming and not really do too much more than that, because players have spent time making their characters, gearing their characters up as well. We don't want to sort of, take the time away. So in terms of tuning updates and sort of timeline, it is planned to do updates before Mythic Week and before Heroic Week, but depending on the bid that we get. That being said, they're not going to be, large changes to sort of change up people's expectations, because fundamentally people have been preparing for, the race world first and their own, journey for quite a while. We don't want to sort of take that away from them.
Okay, so there will be percentage damage changes, usually not major changes to rotation or something like that, unless it's really required, I assume. Yeah,
it'll be similar to what we did in Dragonflight, where before Mythic unlocks and before Heroic unlocks, we'll be taking a look at classes and specs that aren't performing it or overperforming and making adjustments for sure.
Okay, all right, sounds interesting.
So basically, what he said is that first week is a guiding week. That first Mythic 0 week, we're just going to test things out and see what's really overperforming or really underperforming, so we can tweak things before Mythic Plus actually comes out or Mythic Raids come out, so it's not a complete crapshoot. That's a fair answer. I mean, that's fair. That makes sense. It's, as a player, it's kind of annoying that I have to wait so long for content, but from the dev side of things, to have a week of tuning before the real game comes out on the 17th is kind of nice. It's kind of nice. There's a new WoW cinematic out. Oh, great. We'll watch it after this. Perfect.
Another question that has been something on my mind for a long time, and I'm not sure if you can say anything to it, but basically my understanding of the way Mythic works currently, Mythic rating, the difficulty, to me, it seems like that the skill gap between the world first guilds and an average Mythic guild has grown so large that I feel like they're playing different games almost, right?
Damn.
And I can see how that causes lots of issues when it comes to tuning and the bosses and the difficulty itself. Do you think that is a problem? Do you is that something you think about? Is it something that you think is okay, or that is just something that you want to tackle, or what is your stance on that?
Interesting question. It's a good question. Yeah, there's a very wide range of players. There's the race world first folks, and there's folks who are pushing Hall of Fame, and there's folks who are just doing Mythic normally, and that's just Mythic flow. So there's a very wide range of skill expressions among players. And it is something we consider. It's, why after certain bosses have been defeated at the race world first, we do sort of gradual or, sometimes heavy nerfs. That's sort of the plan. It's something to keep in mind. This time around, our approach is to use the Severed Strands buff, which is sort of I think that's what it is. It's the gradual sort of buffing of player damage and healing over the course of the raid. So a month into the raid, your damaging needs to go up a little bit. And that gives us basically more agency where players feel like they're getting stronger, and we don't have to sort of like keep nerfing bosses for the players to make sure they're making progress. So yeah, it's something to be taken into account.
I didn't know this was a thing. Sorry for my ignorance here, guys. Do you basically get default stronger every week in the raid? Like you get a buff and each week you get stronger even if you don't get any loot, just because they want people to eventually clear the raid? Yes? When was this added? Yes? Okay, I actually didn't know that. Oh, it's new. Oh, it's new. That's why I didn't know. Just like an ICC, right. Right. Interesting. I'm trying to think how I feel about that. I feel like my knee-jerk response is like, well, that sucks, because you want it to feel like each week you get stronger because the loot you're obtaining, not like you're getting stronger each week because you're gaining a buff. Like, that feels pretty crappy, right? Like, I think we could all agree. However, on a practical level, I think it's a really good practical solution in the sense that the tier doesn't have to be continually nerfed. You can kind of just leave things, and each week it's going to get slightly easier, so each week slightly more guilds will be able to clear Mythic. So it makes it so that people can, you know, clear the content before the next content comes out. But I feel like philosophically there's like a disconnect there. I feel like philosophically it feels a bit jagged, right? It's not like a very sexy solution in terms of, oh, this feels really nice, right?
It's a very large skill gap, and that is something that we certainly keep in mind.
Okay, interesting. I think the separate strands buff is also like it helps with player progression, considering the new system that we have with the upgrades, right? Because it feels like a lot of the upgrades that we get are really early on, and then at some point your player power progression kind of stops. So I think the separate strands buff and continuing downwards, I think gives the guilds that cope that maybe next time they can do it if they're really close to cleaning them out. So I think that's kind of important as well.
That's cool,
so yeah. I like that a lot. So recently you've announced or you applied changes to Mythic Plus disorients.
Yeah.
So basically they're not going to be as strong anymore as they were in Dragonflight, where you just use loads and loads of AoE disrupts and stuns to stop the casts from happening.
Sure.
And now the lockdown that happens on these casts is going to be a lot shorter.
Yeah.
Which means that interrupts are going to be more important in return, right? Now, there are some classes that either don't have interrupts at all, like priests, and there's classes that are really long cooldowns away from this. Is that something we think might be a problem in classes you maybe address if it is? Or do you think that's just something that is people have to work?
Well, I'll talk about the Mythic Plus changes some of this, and if you want to dive into the class side, I think that would be a great way to cover this. But first and foremost, we always look at the tools the players have when we're designing the encounters in dungeons and Mythic Plus specifically. And the changes you're talking about where it stops no longer completely interrupt a cast and then it just goes off again. Really, it's not just about emphasizing kicks, it's about emphasizing deliberate play and strategy in the way that you pull the dungeon and the way that you choose to engage in certain facts and mobs. So it's about giving players more choices, or basically making them have to make more interesting choices or have to grapple with that in the same way. And obviously that's a little bit of a balance when some classes have some abilities and the classes have, that don't have the same, they have one to do them, etc. But the overall intention for all of the Mythic Plus changes that we made this time is to encourage a more deliberate play style. It basically slow down the, like, we're gonna Zerg every single pack, AE it all up, burn it down, and then move on to the next thing. And actually, some of those abilities you should have to choose. No, I want to grapple with this versus this, and I'm not going to pull that back because I know we don't have a stop for that, or not a big pick for that quite yet. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to have a follow-up question.
Yeah,
if that's
totally.
Okay. So you're saying that, and this is something that I've seen in the changes as well, that it looks like you're trying to stop players from doing bigger pulls and just surging everything down, as you say, just AoE stopping it. To me, it feels like that is what I like doing them. Like, I like doing this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like people get that massive dopamine hit from pulling half the dungeon and killing it, but you have to do it right or else you're gonna die. But if you do, that's how you get those big massive dopamine hits, right? You pull everything, you stop in one spot and you blast it. I feel like that's why people get addicted to M+, because you find like the best tanking routine, mapping for the tank to like go and get the optimal amount of percent, and you still have to like not mess up. So yeah, this is like a fair follow-up question. In general, I also think in terms of the previous question, the class homogenization question, like, well, some classes, let's say like a Moonkin, only have a kick on a 1 minute cooldown, like 60 seconds. So a Moonkin only has one kick every minute, whereas like a Rogue has like, what, 4 kicks a minute or more? So it's like, well, if you're going to make it more kick-based, are Rogues just going to be better than Moonkins? And generally, not all the time, but I feel like the philosophy for that is like, yeah, and Moonkins have some things that Rogues don't have. So take your pick, right? It's like mages have a kick on like twice the cooldown of a rogue, but mages have things that rogues don't have too. So take your pick. And it's like there's going to be pros and cons. I think once we get to a style of development for the video game where every class has to have all of the tools of every other class, or else you're going to whine on the forums, we get to a really homogenized bad game. But when we start putting our foot down and saying, yeah, your class doesn't have this, but it has other things, so be happy with what you have or re-roll, kind of a thing. I think that is better philosophy in general. Not saying all the time, but in general, it produces a better end result.
These big goals and pressing like big AoE buttons, seeing like big numbers. Like I think a lot of players really do enjoy that. And whenever I think there's changes that are being applied to the game that stop me from doing that, especially in a forceful way, because if it's just more difficult to do it, then I know, okay, we just have to play better to execute that.
Yeah.
But if there's something that really completely stops you from doing that, like certain auras that have damage reduction, stuff like that, then I feel like, okay, no matter what I do, I can't do this big pull.
Sure.
And is this something that you're aware that people like these big pulls and you're still trying to stop that?
Totally. And like, I enjoy that as well. A lot of people do, but if you follow the through line, if the progression of gameplay is bigger and bigger pulls, and all you're doing is, hey, I'm basically trying to pull as much of the dungeon as I possibly can, and then burn it down and move on to the next one and do that and do that. It forces a specific group time. It forces all of the interesting mechanics that might actually make the one dungeon different from another dungeon, starts to like get sort of rubbed down so that everything starts to feel the same. Running different Mythic Plus dungeons becomes very, very repetitive. And then ultimately in the long run, it means that some players don't have the option to participate if they don't want to play one of the classes that are specifically required to do that. So like thinking about Demon Hunter Tank in the last seasons that were like, in order to do what you were talking about, you had to absolutely have a Demon Hunter Tank in your group. You had to have certain classes and those kinds of things. And so this is like, it's the challenge with game design is always like, okay, can we not turn it back all the way so that we're absolutely forcing you to play like that, but can we dial the knob back a little bit and then see how it goes, get feedback, see if it's like, oh no, nobody likes this, we've gone too far, okay, let's turn the knob back a little bit more, and then see. And I think really high skill players are still going to be doing a lot of this, and it'll be maybe slightly smaller goals than what they've been in the past, or with some of the tank debuffs that have happened. Like it might have to be a little bit more careful, and then we'll see how progression goes throughout the entire expansion.
That's a good answer.
Sure.
Priests.
Oh, priest getting interrupted. I mean, as Michael mentioned, really our goal is to try to give players the tools that they have to basically succeed in different environments. Priest getting interrupts, I can't speak to whether that is or isn't happening.
Wait, priests currently don't have an interrupt, right? Unless I'm missing that too. I haven't played my priest this expansion, but I don't think they have an interrupt, as far as I know. I've dueled some priests and they don't. They have a silence. Yeah, like a silence on Shadow, but I'm talking like a kick, an interrupt, not a silence. Okay. So they don't, but maybe he's saying, okay, I'm going to go back a couple seconds. I think he's saying they might add it or something.
He's getting interrupts. I can't speak to whether that is or isn't happening. Over the course of Dragonflight, we saw a lot of class changes. A lot of things are on sort of the menu. Hero talents are another part of the game that we're going to be looking, very closely at. We've added a lot of crowd patrol hero talents. We're going to be looking at them, making sure that they're going in the right direction, that they're tuned properly.
Once again, guys, like the way I think about this, and I don't know if I have like a complete accurate understanding, but the way I think about it is this. Yeah, priests don't have an interrupt, but they have life grip. And no other class has life grip. Are you just going to give life grip to other classes? I mean, I guess the evoker has the, like you can fly to them and bring them, like fly here or whatever it's called, like which is kind of similar maybe, but you get my point, right? Like you want classes to feel like they're unique. Like if you just give a kick to a priest because because they don't have a kick, it's like, well, where does that end? Right? Like, I don't know. That, like, I don't subscribe to that idea of like, let's just give every class kind of like every tool so that you can swap them out. And like, so the upside is clear. The upside of giving a priest a kick is like, well, now you could bring a priest in situations where you couldn't bring a priest before. So priest players are happy because you can use more priests. But the downside, I think, is more detrimental than the accessibility increase to one of the 12 or 13 classes or whatever. It's like, well, the downside is now the classes feel the same and you have a less of a unique kit. And now you're easily replaceable. And now your class doesn't feel like I'm bringing something to the table that's uniquely my own. So I think the downside is too great, to be honest, for an MMO. Yeah.
So I think players can expect a lot of class updates and spec updates, and you'll honestly even hear a ton of updates going more within. But specifics for things like priest getting interrupts, can we talk?
Okay. And other classes getting shorter interrupts? Like me?
The solar beam is still 1 minute, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, but it's.
I was just saying that. So I don't. Does Nagira play a Moonkin? That's maybe what she's asking. Yeah, 1 minute interrupt on Moonkins. Once again, my thought process on this is like, look, Moonkins bring things to the table that other classes don't have. Let's not homogenize this. Just be like, yeah, you have a longer cooldown on your kick, but it's a permanent kick that stays in place, and it's an AoE kick. You have pros and cons. Let's not just like homogenize everything to one class, right? In general, I think that's a bad thing. In fact, the game is already very much that way. I think moving more in that direction is probably not good for the health of the long term of the game. I really don't. Yeah.
It's an AoE silence, right? So that's true. No current plans on changing Solar Beam for now, at least not for launch.
Okay. I had to try. All right, then I was wondering about when it comes to class balancing. We've seen a lot of class balancing, or usually we see a lot of class balancing at the start of patches and the start of expansions that are more focused on grids, right? On single target damage profiles, and to make sure that everyone's kind of in line, everyone is valuable. But when it comes to a class, I think balancing a class in particular when it comes to damage profiles is something that like has to be for the whole season, right? And if changes already happen at the start of a season and not too many changes happen later, it feels like, oh, the meta has evolved like 2 months in, and now this is like something that everyone plays, and all the other classes are kind of being left wherever they are, and they're not being buffed or nerfed as much. Is that something that you want to maybe do differently in the war living and do more and class focus changes later?
It's an interesting sort of problem that you're bringing up, right? Because it's sort of the same boat of people have picked their spec for whatever content they're doing, in which case Mythic Plus. So if we go through and we massively change, how one class spec performs, people like they sort of like, well, I was going to play this, but now now we nerfed it, so I can't really play that anymore. So to a certain extent, we do want to basically try not to upset meta too much. So that being said, considering Mythic Plus is such a vast part of the game, for some people it's the only thing that they do, which is great. Same for contact PvP. When we talk about tuning, we do talk about Mythic Plus. We do talk about PvP. We have separate conversations entirely for like things like battleground balance versus arena balance, same with Mythic Plus balance versus raid balance. So it's certainly top of mind for us. But when it comes to sort of the larger sweeping changes, we try to sort of get those established as early as possible in a season. That way, if players are trying to push for their title, 2 or 3 months in, they don't feel like we just like pull the rug out under. So that's sort of our thinking there.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed when it comes to class, like I agree that changing classes halfway through, like people are going to be disappointed, but plus is something that's like the rank 1 title, for example, happens at the end of the season. So even if you change something mid-season, I feel like people technically do have enough time to, maybe play another character or focus on something else if they wanted to. But I guess the problem is, which did happen in the past, when a strong class got nerfed, all of a sudden the score that people were able to achieve with a certain class is not achieved.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is a huge problem. So I mean, I see the issues, but I just I wish classes would be balanced more in class.
Oh, for sure.
I see that it's problematic when it comes to classes.
It's just a very large design challenge at the end of the day, especially with hero talents now. We're not doubling specs, but we almost kind of are.
Right, yeah.
And then you apply that to not just Mythic Plus, but content like Delves, because a ton of players are going to be playing Delves. Delves is going to be a huge part of the game. So we have to take that into account. It's just a lot of variables and a lot of content that we need to support. Mythic Plus is certainly one of them, though. I think one thing that we are trying to accomplish a little bit differently this time around, though, when we talk about War Within, is making sure that, season over season, the quote-unquote meta feels a little bit different, at least, because I think in the past that's been places where we can move on.
It like balancing is tough because there's always going to be a top spec. So if you nerf the top spec, there's going to be a new top spec. And if you nerf that top spec, there's a new top spec. There's always a top spec. And we live in 2024. It's like min-max society for gamers, right? And it's like people want the top spec because they want to try to push keys to the highest of their ability. And they have the internet, so they know what the top spec is. When it gets nerfed, there's a new top spec. So it's never something that you can just like get rid of. And that's what makes it challenging, because once you nerf one thing, then people will start complaining about the next thing. So in my eyes, it's not necessarily about, like in my eyes, it's more about making sure there's not as much variation or deviance, right? So if mages are number 1 and they're this strong, and demon hunters are number 2 and they're this strong, and DKs are number 3 and they're like this strong, like, okay, that's pretty good. But if rogues are number 4 and they're like this strong, it's like, well, what do? It's like, well, you don't nerf mages, demon hunters, and DKs because rogues are weak. You buff rogues a considerable amount. It still might mean they're number 4, but now they're number 4 by a much closer margin, right? But there's still going to be a class on the top. And it's like, okay, well, if you want to nerf mages, sure, fine, do that, but then you still have demon hunters up there, right? So then it's like, okay, well, let's stack demon hunters then, and then mages are down below. So it's like you're not really solving much, right? So you have it's a very, very, very complicated thing. I think the big problem is when you have a class, say Moonkins, or let's say Paladins, pink, when you have a class that's like this, it's like, okay, well, yeah, you need to nerf that, right? You need, like, if something's like this, it's like, okay, well, let's nerf it to get it to like here at least, right? And then if you have a class that's like hunters, if you have a class that's like this, it's like, okay, well, yeah, we need, like, let's get it at least close. I feel like that's the game, right? Let's get it close. Let's like, there's always going to be a top spec, there's always going to be a bottom spec, but let's have the variance between the top and the bottom as small as we can make it. And I feel like that's the goal, right? Not easy.
Okay, here's another question about Delves that I did not submit first. Can I still ask you?
Yes, but we may not have an amazing answer for you.
All right, so since you were speaking about class balancing in Delves, I was wondering, because of course you can do Delves by yourself, and it's probably incredibly difficult to make sure that each and every spec can do the Delves.
That's a good question, yeah.
So there's balance between one another, right? So a tank has the same like a hard time or easy time in a certain tier versus like a healer or a damage. And I was wondering if you're, first of all, going to address that with the way the Delve works, depending on what class you're playing at, or if you're able to change specs, like to have certain talents or abilities to do more damage in Delves. You can balance it differently.
Well, I can talk a little bit about balance and Delves. Sure, Delves, the class in it. So the way Delves balancing is working is actually a little bit based on some of the stuff we've done in the past that is like sort of classless instance-based content. And so what that means is that if you go in with a healer, we're able to actually tune the experience to work a little bit differently for a healer versus a tank versus DPS. So that's one side. The reality is doing damage is how you kill monsters. And so being able to do some level of damage and your ability to do that will dictate how maybe the difficulty level that you can go through in certain kinds of packs of other monsters in the higher end versions of Delve. That may still be true. They should still, like, the intention is that they're still accomplishable with anybody, but it may be maybe a little bit easier for a high DPS class to get through certain things versus a healer who might take a little bit longer but can still get them, right? On the class side,
I mean, on the class side, like if, let's say Resto Shaman is having a hard time versus, Holy Priest or both healers, we do have tools to make it easier for certain specs, or in some cases, dare I say, even harder for certain specs if necessary, to make sure that content is similar.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Thank you.
I feel like from my perspective, and maybe I'm off here, I'd actually love for you guys to correct me on this, but if you main a healer, say you main a resto shaman, then delve like solo PvE content might just like not like you like if you main a healer and you can get instant queues for M+, you know, people want you in rate. Like I feel like the solo delve content might just not be for you. Is that like a weird thing to say? If you're a healer and you want a solo PvE content that requires damage, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Brand can go in DPS though. Is Brand's damage good? Because I know Brand's heals. Not too hot. Not too hot. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I mean, hey man, if you're a healer and you like doing delves, that's dope. I mean, actually here's a question. For healers out there that did Mage Tower, how did that work? How did healing Mage Towers work? Because the Mage Tower for Mage, obviously you killed a boss. For healing Mage Tower, what was the fun difficulty for that? Did you have followers that you healed, or how did it work? It was a specific healer challenge and you healed a party. Okay, so it was tuned for healers, and you kept friendly people alive, and the friendly people then killed. Yeah, okay. Well, I guess that's fine then. Like, if that's how they're gonna do delves with Bran, and like if you're a healer and you go in with Bran and Bran pumps and you just keep him up, like I guess that's cool too. You know, as long as it's interesting to some degree. I guess that's pretty dope. But if it's like, if you're I'm just thinking like a resto shaman just sitting in the back casting like a lava burst and a lightning bolt. It's like, dude, all right, cool, man.
All right, so then I wanted to talk a little bit about the tank and healer adjustments.
Oh, someone in the chat said Brand's healing is bugged for cloth classes. Oh, really? Is it bugged for mages? Interesting. I didn't know that. Because, dude, I've done all the delves, and they feel like it feels like Brand's doing just absolutely nothing. He heals my mage for 30k, and he heals my pally for 300k. Oh, that's interesting. Well, if it's actually bugged for cloth, then maybe I haven't given Bran a chance.
That you talked about, or that you applied to M+. As far as I understood, the idea was that tanks are supposed to take a little bit more sustained damage. So the healer is required to heal them a little bit more. Not to like sit there and spam heal the tank, but just to have to keep an eye on the tank. And if the tank does not get any healing by the healer for a long time, then they should eventually die and shouldn't be able to survive forever. Once that changes were applied, I talked to some of the tanks and I did some dungeons myself on beta. And some tanks said that it didn't have as much impact as they thought it would have by bleeding the forest. And some people said, okay, did they notice it? But only with some healers, maybe not with others. So these changes that you did, do you think that it hit the mark and it was intended the way it was had? Or do you think that that's still something you're working on and like maybe changing some knobs throughout?
Sure. Oh, do you?
I'll jump in.
Sure, go for it.
I'm a big Mythic Plus player, so I'm excited about this changes. What I thought was funny about this one was that the community conversation around the Blue Post was a lot bigger than the impact of the changes themselves, right? Everybody was up in arms. Everybody that I was watching was talking about, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing this. It's going to be so much harder. But then when you actually play it, it's not that impactful. It does change things up a little bit. Those, it's about tuning knobs. We tuned it just a little bit one way, and we'll see how it goes. And that increases maybe the value of health stones in your dungeon, or it increases survivability a little bit more. You might choose some talent for survivability that you might not have chosen in the past. But the reality is, right now, I'm feeling pretty good about it. But we'll see as the season kicks off and things progress. We'll definitely be paying super close attention.
All right, so then I have some more questions about that change.
It's a good question, right? Because like, I mean, we all know the feeling of like you're a tank and you don't need heals. Like your whole party could die and you could just like solo the boss yourself. It's just going to take a long time. And the question is like, should that actually be a thing? Like, should you be able to self-sustain yourself, or should you actually kind of like need a healer? So they put in a change that made it so you need a healer more, but obviously it's a spectrum, right? Like you said, you're just twisting the knob a little bit. And it's definitely still that way. And I feel like you can see these changes come through, like in PvP, where certain classes just don't die even with no heals for a very, very, very long time, and mages included. Like I'm not necessarily trying to like complain here more than just like state the current state of the meta. It's like, yeah, you have, you know, I'll just speak for mages. You have alter time, which will pause your life at a certain level for a while, and then you can go back. And then you have displacement, which heals you for like 1,000,000. And then you have shield, which is like 1,000,000 shield. And then you have block, which is like a full heal. And then you have a second block if you're a frost mage, which is like another half HP heal. And then you have half HP for both of them. And then you have shifting power, which resets all of those things. So then you can re-displace, re-alter, re-barrier, and then you have a mass barrier, which can also be reduced. And then you have a bunch of blinks, so you don't get hit anyway. And then it interrupts and CCs. So it's like, even if you don't have a heal for like minutes on end, like you might still be completely fine. Right? And that's a mage. You're not tanking as a mage, right? So for you think of something like a DK or a Demoner, it's like, okay, well, I'll just kind of rotate through my stuff forever, and I don't really need heals. And the implications for Mythic Plus are like, wait a minute. If I'm a healer, should I really just be doing damage? Wait, why do we need a healer? Should we just bring 1 tank and 4 DPS and then just AoE down big pulls and just not really need a healer? And I think the answer is like, well, Blizzard's like, no, like we want healers to have a role, so let's make them more prevalent. That seems like a tricky one, honestly, right? That seems like a tricky one.
And Christy also mentioned that that change might reduce incoming group-like damage, because that was something that in Dragonfly was a big problem, in my opinion at least, that the survivability of the group was incredibly important, and it was like the main thing that was holding you back usually, and not necessarily the damage they were doing. And that's something that I personally didn't enjoy, and I think I got a lot of feedback from other people as well that said they would rather like make sure that the damage is something that they can optimize, and that's holding them back, rather than just dying to a boss without having any defensives left, and they just can't do anything about it. Do you think that this change with the tanks is actually going to affect that aspect? So they the custom dealer has to heal the tank more, that you're tuning back the incoming group-wide damage, so that the group survivability is not going to be as important as it was in Dragonfly?
That's the intent, but it obviously has a lot of nuance, and it depends on the fight, it depends on the dungeon, it depends on the situation. The goal is not to make it more complex, but to change where the complexity is. So you're focusing a little bit more on the tank, you're focusing a little bit less on keeping the group going. But you're still going to have to focus on keeping the group going. Yeah. People will have to use their defensives at appropriate times and just be, careful that way. And that will still continue to be a part of it.
Okay. And if this change is not going to affect that group survivability as much as you wanted it to, do you still consider nerfing the defensives of damage dealers across the board to kind of fix the whole situation of the incoming damage and having to be tuned so highly because the damage dealers have so many defensives available to them?
Yeah, this might be a good class question.
Sure. So this is actually a good question, even for like arena or battlegrounds or battleground blitz or delves, like a lot of different classes. It's just like, okay, so classes are just so strong now, it's so hard to kill anyone, right? And that's just what I was just talking about, like for mage, for example, right? Like you have, every class has so many defensives that, okay, so to actually kill something, you have to either just completely mess up, or if you're like a decent player and knows how to press your defensives, you have to make a PvE encounter incredibly like challenging. Like it's just gonna have to one-shot you. Like you're gonna basically just have to get one shot because you have so many defensives to rotate through that you won't actually die unless you get one shot. And if it's a PvP encounter, it's like no one's ever gonna die unless you line up just like the perfect, the perfect burst rotation with someone that like just can't move because they have they're stun locked or whatever, right? Or you just keep doing damage until the healer's out of mana or something. Like, so it's a really good question, not only for M+, but for like delves, for arenas, blitz, like everything here. So I'm curious how they answer this one.
Sure. It's a little bit of an arms race, right? Like we buff player defensives by things like hero talents, so ray damage used to go up, so healers have more to do. But if players don't hit those defensives in some groups, not everyone's playing at the highest Keystone level, heroes having a bad time. That is definitely something we talked about quite a bit in terms of actually adjusting players' defensives for content like Mythic Plus. It's difficult because then we're adjusting defensives for players that are only doing delves or only doing world content. There's a lot of people to consider, and also raids. I don't think for now we go so far as to be hitting Fair's defensives. But like Michael said, this is just the very beginning. There's a lot of knobs that we need to tune still, and we'll be tuning going into season 1 of The War Within. So, time will tell. But as of right now, we have no plans to sort of hit Fair defensives.
Okay. I'm going to keep asking the question. Asked last time as well.
Sure.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think she asked the same question in an interview like 6 months ago or a year ago, but it's a continual, it's a good question. In my eyes, and people can agree or disagree or, call me biased or whatever, but I mean, I think I am biased, but I think everyone's biased, so that's fine, to some degree. Like, in my eyes, every class is like too many defensives right now. Like for mage, I think mages don't need displacement. I think displacement is just overkill. I think Master of Time probably doesn't need to give you another blink, right? And people, all the mages in here are like, shut up, Xaryu, don't nerf mages. But I'm just trying to say, like, even as a mage, like, I'm not trying to say I want mages to be good. I want the class to feel, I want the game to feel good. And I think when you have too many defensives, it breeds this type of gameplay where, like, I messed up, oh, let's heal back up. Oh, like, just heal back up, heal back up, heal back up, heal back up. And then it's just like, what, And it's a spectrum. You don't want no defensives, and you don't want too many. So, for example, just as a thought experiment, if you had 100 defensives, 100 defensives, we could probably 100% of us could agree that that's too many, right? 99% of us. So like that one guy might be like, dude, that would be sick. 99% of us will agree 100 defensives is too many. So that's like, okay, so we have our upper limit, and the bottom limit is like 1 defensive is probably too little, or 0 defensive is probably too little. So it's like, okay, well, you want somewhere between 0 and 100. It's like, okay, well, let's have that conversation of what's the proper amount. And in my opinion, right now, when you look at mage defensives, like you have Ice Block, you have Invis, which is a wall, right? You have Alter Time, you have Displacement, you have Blinks, and that's not counting pseudo defensives. Like Dragon's Breath is a CC, which is kind of a defensive, or Blast Wave, it's a knock. I'm talking just like defensives on your character, right? So in my opinion, oh, and then your mirror images. I forgot about mirrors. That's a kind of a shield wall too. I'm probably forgetting about something else too. And maybe that's pretty much it. I mean, barrier and mass barrier too. Yeah, I guess those are defensives. Anyway, my point is that's probably too many. So scaling that back a little bit. And what I proposed for mages would be something like remove displacement altogether. Make Alter Time a 90-second cooldown instead of 50, and remove the extra blink you get from it. And maybe start there. Right? So you would have 1 less blink, half as many altars, and 1 less displacement. That would be like the mage treatment. And then from there, you can take a similar treatment to like all the classes. So I'm not saying just nerf mages. I'm saying you take a similar treatment across the board, and I feel like the game would feel a lot nicer that way. PvE, PvP, Mythic Plus, all that kind of stuff, right? If you make a mistake, it's a little bit more like it hits you a bit harder, and then things actually die a bit quick. Like things die with a bit more agency, because you can't just keep making mistakes and keep resetting from them. Like someone's gonna die. Anyway, agree or disagree? I think that's my perspective on how that would work. Temp Shield for Arcane, yeah, it's another one. Not for Frost though. Anyway, let's keep watching the video.
All right, then one more question about this, about M-Class in general.
Sure.
I wanted to know, because in my opinion, there's 2 things that can hold you back in your class, and for you like to time it or not time it. Like 2 major things. Number 1 would be survivability, like you're just stuck on a boss and you can't pull it because the ability just shuts you and you're running out of defensives. Yeah. Or you manage to do the whole dungeon, but you're running out of time. So you basically we're not efficient enough, you didn't do enough damage. So in a scenario where a team has like the best comm possible for this dungeon, for this situation, and has near perfect gameplay, what would you think is like the ideal scenario? Like what would be holding this group back on like the highest skill level it can do?
That's an interesting theoretical question for this expansion. Well, I think if you're pushing at the highest keys, it's because of the way we changed the affixes, right? It used to be true that on Tyrannica weeks you were really good at stumped, and that was like you just couldn't get past certain passive killers, that kind of thing. theoretically now, every week would be the same. It'll feel the same. So you'll be pushing. It'll be more about.
I'll see how that works.
You will probably for certain classes and certain abilities, you are going to run into like this is the thing that is always killing me at a certain level. But I think more broadly speaking, it's going to be.
Okay.
It's gonna be what? It like the mic cut out.
But I think more broadly speaking, it's going to be.
Okay.
Darn it, the mic cut out. What did he say? Group. It went fuzzy. I played it 2 times. I don't know what he said. Played it one more time.
Cool. But I think more broadly speaking, it's going to be.
Okay.
I would go that route too. In the War Within world, I think my gut says it's going to be more like raiding, where you're going to want to continue doing content over and over until you master it, and then you're going to want to figure out like, oh, I'm going to save my 2-minute cooldown for this pack, my 3-minute cooldown for this pack, but that didn't work out. So next time I'll do that, I'm going to move that around, and optimizing like player damage and healer damage and tank damage is going to be a big part of it. That's my.
Okay, that's really good to hear, because I personally always think that's more fun to like, if you run out of time at the end, or you like talk to a group, okay, let's do this differently, use our cooldowns differently, try to make this pool more efficient. I feel like that's more fun than to just survive an ability one.
Yeah,
you
totally.
like have so many options to survive.
Nobody likes getting stomped and not being able to do anything.
All right, then I have another question about hero talents. So the hero talent trees, of course, are completely new in the War Within, and there's some hero talent trees that are either incredibly like flashy looking and really like satisfying, and there's some hero talent trees that change your gameplay a lot in that regard, and then there's other hero talent trees that are maybe not as satisfying, maybe like passive talents don't impact your rotation as much, and others that are maybe not like visually as interesting as others. Is that something that you're aware of and that you're like working on improving throughout your War Within, or did you like, are you not planning on doing any major changes in the hero talents?
Good question. Hero talents are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. The moment that we sort of launch, they're part of your class and spec. They're evergreen. They're not going away after War Within. We're going to treat them like how we treat classes and specs. And if Dragonfly has anything to show for it, we've done a lot of redesigns, a lot of updates for specs and classes over that expansion. So in terms of updates for hero talents, stuff like that, certainly on the docket. In terms of visuals, we definitely have a goal of making sure that they feel visually distinct from each other. Some will naturally be more flashy. I think it's hard to be flashier than summoning 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse on like a 3-minute cooldown. Like it's kind of hard to top that.
Yes.
But there's also value in something that's a little bit sort of smaller and more like passive, because not all players want to have very complex hero talent trees. So in terms of visuals, we're always trying to do better there. And players can certainly expect updates in that field. In terms of passive versus complex, we understand that for some players, talents are inherently very complex. Specs already feel potentially too complex for them. So for some hero talents, we opt to make them a little bit simpler, a little bit more passive, because players essentially need to pick one or the other. So some trees will be more passive, some will be more complex. The last thing we wanted to do is have players feel like they need to sort of like, oh, every single hero talent tree gives me a new button or change something dramatically. That's not really a goal of ours. We want them to feel more like flavor than anything else. And have
I think they did a pretty good job with that.
Your class and spec be dictated more by your class and spec trees.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. All right, so
She seemed disappointed in that answer, but I think they did a pretty good job with that in general. Like as a mage, as a frost mage, for example, you have how your class spec looks. Frostfire and Spellslinger, well, I haven't actually filled out the Spellslinger one for Frost, but for Arcane I have. A lot of the Spellslinger stuff is just kind of like passive in the background, and it's just kind of like doing its thing. Frostfire, at least for Arcane, is a lot more deliberate, changes your rotation. But at the end of the day, you're still like an Arcane mage. You're still a Frost mage. All of your talents are still your talents, and it doesn't change it like dramatically, at least from my experience. Now, my big question is, he said hero talents are an evergreen system. It's like, where do you go in next expansion? Do you just move a couple things around, or do you make the hero talent trees a little longer? If you make the hero talent trees just have like 2 more spots, make them longer, I guess that would work. But then what about the expansion after that? You just make it like a little longer again? And then what about the expansion after that? You know what? It's like, at some point, you just like, I don't know. It gets tricky because you can't just add in a new hero talent tree every expansion. Maybe you add in a third one. I don't know. The point of the point of the conversation is you don't want things getting too complex. And we're already at a spot where like things right now feel pretty good. I'd say things right now feel pretty good, but maybe they're on the verge of becoming too complex. So where do you go from here, I guess is my question. You can't just keep adding, right?
I have to ask one more question. Otherwise, the Moonkin community is going to be mad. So, Moonkins.
Moonkins,
So,
oh my goodness.
the hero talents for Moonkins have been a little bit underwhelming for most of the community, at least if you like that, but and my personal opinion as well. And the gameplay for Moonkin seems lackluster because we lost a tiny Polestar and we didn't really get any compensation for it. At least I feel like we didn't get as much of a gameplay compensation as Polestar was. And in addition, it feels like the damage is also a little bit lackluster too. Is that something that you're aware of and that maybe is getting addressed?
Yeah, certainly. A lot of community feedback's on our radar. We read a lot. We read Reddit. We read forums. Honestly, if someone makes a TikTok about class tuning, I'm probably going to watch it at some point. It's going to show up on my For You page. So yeah, we're aware of people's sort of complaints and feedback, whether that's positive or negative. I'm going to start from the middle of that question. In terms of sort of numerical updates to hero talents or Moonkin in general, we're still planning to do, like I mentioned previously, there will be tuning passes going into Season 1 of the War Within, and there'll be tuning passes into the War Within for Season 1. So all that stuff is on the table, not just Moonkin, but for essentially any hero talent or class of spec. We want to make sure that Season 1 is as good as possible. In terms of hero talent updates or redesigns, can't really talk too much about that at this point. We're happy with how they're going for launch. That being said, we are, discussing future updates for Moonkin down the line, not for launch, but for a future patch, and we're looking to sort of address a lot of the pain points that the community brought up for sure.
All right, that was really good to see. I love that answer. Thank you.
Very professional answer with the chapter in the video is called Balance Druid Help.
I have 2 more bonus questions.
Oh boy.
So you mentioned that you really do like spiders the last time I know you had an interview. And I was wondering if you had a really interesting, cool fact about spiders that you could share with us.
Spiders, okay.
That's a fascinating.
That's all of you.
Yeah, totally. Well, I guess, man, which to choose? I think actually the one that I shared that I like the most is so I have spiders.
That is
This one on the top was actually a spider that I had in the office. Was a tarantula that folks in the office knew about. Some people were uncomfortable with it, so I brought it home. And unfortunately, she passed away during the pandemic. This one is one I found camping with my son, and it has, it's hard to see, but it has all its babies at the bottom. And then this bottom one was another one that...
Dude, one time when I was a kid, there was a spider in my room. So I grabbed a shoe and I killed it. Obviously, right? That's what you would do. But the spider had a bunch of babies on it. And there's like a million spiders that went everywhere, all over my room when I hit the spider and killed it. Holy crap, it was the scariest thing, man. It was the scariest thing, dude. There was like thousands of them and they're all just like crawling everywhere. And I was just like, what did I just do? And I just ran out of my room. I was freaking out, man. I was freaking out.
That when people at the office learned that I like spiders, they brought more spiders to me, which is why I now have more spiders at my desk that are sort of on display. And that was the biggest one. So,
that is very, very
so hopefully that's a cool fact, but I like
very cool. All right, do you also share that excitement for spiders? Or
I think
like crab song.
Arachnophobia mode is great. I don't personally mind spiders. I think they're neat. Maybe not so much as micro, but they're great. I'm looking forward to killing a bunch of spiders in the raid, that's for sure. But no, spiders are neat.
All right, I also saw that you really like kimchi.
I love kimchi.
Never had
kimchi,
before.
spiders, fantastic bonus questions here.
You have to try it. There's so many variations. Like there's cabbage.
I live. So what's like the best way? Like can you recommend any kind of kimchi?
Yeah, like an 8. Well, I think you have to start with like the radish kimchi. Like radish kimchi is sort of the classical kimchi. There's also like cubed radish, which is my personal favorite.
I feel like kimchi isn't that good, really. That's what I think. I don't think kimchi is actually that tasty. I'm gonna be completely honest. Yeah, I don't think it's that good at all. I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it, dude.
There's Napa cabbage, which is probably the more traditional kimchi.
Is it spicy? I'm not a big fan of spice.
I wouldn't say it's very spicy, but definitely has a kick.
Okay.
So there's a lot of types of kimchi.
Wait, why is he going more in depth with his kimchi answer than he is with the rest of the questions in the interview? This guy's breaking it down.
Talk about kimchi. There's red kimchi, which is traditional kimchi, and that is spicier. There's also white kimchi, which is less spicy. So maybe you should try that.
White kimchi.
White kimchi. I grew up in Bulgaria. I grew up eating all like pickled foods. So there's not a lot of like equivalent foods to that here. There's like pickled vegetables, and that's not really the same thing. And I just really like the taste of kimchi. It reminds me of home.
Okay, really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try kimchi.
You should. Yeah, it's great.
All right, thank you so much for.
Yeah, maybe I need to try more kimchi. I don't know. Like maybe I just haven't had good kimchi or something. That's crazy. All right. Good interview. Great questions. I don't know why my brain went here, but I want to say it. I feel like for me, what makes a game fun is it comes down to really just like one simple thing. And it comes down to the gameplay loop. And is the gameplay loop something that's really satisfying? Right? It's a very basic one thing. Is the gameplay loop something that's satisfying? Is it something I want to do over and over and over and over and over again? Is it addicting? Is the gameplay loop addicting? What do I mean by gameplay loop? It's like, well, when you go into a game, the buttons you have to press and the order you have to press them in order to get a kill or to get a win or to complete the game mode. Is that a fun thing to do repeatedly? Right? And I feel like when it comes to Mythic Plus, like the game is set up in a way with a lot of these, you know, these conversations with class balance and tuning and deliberate changes with this and that, where the Mythic Plus gameplay loop comes down to like how effectively can we run through this dungeon and press our big AoE buttons and get those big AoE pulls and dopamine occurs and we do it again. And to me, that's like a pretty good gameplay loop. And that's why Mythic Plus, it seems like a lot of people really enjoy it. And I want to say this without sounding too pessimistic, and I'll say it from a personal perspective. In my opinion, the gameplay loop for PvP has not become a gameplay loop that I feel like I want, that I really enjoy. And why is that? Well, in PvP, the gameplay loop is maximize your AoE damage and not die. Like that's the gameplay loop. If anyone has played high rated PvP in the last couple of years, that's the gameplay loop. And like for me, that gameplay loop just isn't that addicting anymore. It's not this fun anymore. So it's like, okay, well, what is a fun addicting gameplay loop? Well, it's like, in my opinion, a fun addicting gameplay loop is a lot more single target stuff, like a lot more single target stuff. Some classes still AoE, that's fine, but like you want to be cross-CCing multiple players at the same time with a lot of single target damage, right? And PvP is more moved to the Mythic Plus gameplay loop where you spam AoE, right? Anyway, I didn't want to come off like too pessimistically, but more analytically, it's like from the analytical side, it's like the gameplay loop that made PvP great for so long, in my opinion, was that finesse, the single target, and the control, and the, you know, cross CC and stuff like that, and seeing that being kind of replaced with the gameplay loop of just do a lot of AoE damage all the time, for me, it's just less interesting, you know. And I think hopefully people in the chat think that's a fair take. Like I said, I'm not trying to hate, I'm not trying to, you know, say other people have to necessarily agree with that, but that's certainly my perspective. So I don't know, maybe that'll provide like a little bit of insight towards the end of this video.